Hey guys, I know it's been a while since my last video. I wanted you to know I'm still working on Flexibles Part 2, but my entire life was just uprooted when we decided to redo our basement floors. Felt like I just moved my entire life out of this house and then right back into it since I spent all my time down here. However, on the upside, before we repopulated this room, which was previously a gym, I decided to take the space, take it over for however long it takes to build my RatRig V-core 3.1. I have spent weeks accumulating parts, printing more parts, and all these panels back here. I actually went to a community college and took classes on CNC routing, which is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I cut 15 polycarbonate panels for the enclosure for this printer. So I'm gonna give you a little tour of what's going on here. My goal is not to produce some video walkthrough and I mean, that would be like a 20-hour video. Then there's plenty of those online. I just want to give you guys a taste of what kind of insanity you need to have to pick up a project like this and see what I'm working on kind of like in the background. All right, we just had the floors redone, which is a great opportunity to start building my new printer before we repopulate this and everything gets to be a huge mess like it is over here. But before we put all that stuff back over here, it's time to build a printer. RatRig V-core 3.1. This is going to become the war zone for the next who knows how long. I got some heavy lighting here. Here's where I'm going to be building on this table here. So I have full 360-degree access. I can walk all the way around the table to work on different angles. Over here we have all the parts that I printed in ASA. It's a lot like ABS. It's basically I just call it ABS version 2.0 because it's basically better in most ways than ABS. And it's temperature resistant, which is what you want because this printer is going to be enclosed. All those panels over there are going to create a nice, warm, cozy box for all the stuff inside. I had to print all these parts. You can get RatRig to send you these parts. So I think it's like $60 to have them print all these parts for you. But you know, I've got a printer, so let's save the money. Over here, we have a whole bunch of aluminum brackets. These are the endless brackets for helping put together the 3030 aluminum extrusion. So the entire frame is going to be built out of these. Most printers are built with 2020 extrusion, which means that this distance right here is 20 millimeters, but these are 30 millimeters. It doesn't sound like a big difference, but it's actually based on, I believe, the square of the cross-sectional area. All right, so this was a long way of saying this is dramatically more sturdy and rigid than 2020 aluminum. Up here we have the 5 motors. These are, they're not in any particular order, but there's gonna be a motor for the X, the Y, and then 3 Z motors. And the Z motors are what's gonna lift the build plate, which is over here. So it's gonna have 3 different points at which motors will be attached. So the 3 independent motors will be lifting this corner, and this edge. Oh, I have it reversed. Those 2 corners and this back edge. And that way it can use this automatic bed leveler here, which is going to be right next to the nozzle, to detect basically how level the bed is. And if it's not level, it can adjust those 3 points to make it level. You know, if I had gotten to this point and I looked at all this stuff, I'd say, you know what, I can at least count these parts. You know, this may not be so bad. But then I unpack this, and this is a lot of screws and hardware and bearings. And to make matters worse, this is for the RatRig 3.0. The day that this arrived, like literally an hour after this arrived, they announced there's a RatRig 3.1. Go ahead and spend $100 to buy an upgrade kit. So luckily it arrived before I had printed any of these parts or cut any of these panels. So I printed all the 3.1 parts, cut all the 3.1 panels, and we're just gonna have to figure it out as we go, which of these are obsolete and need to be replaced with these. So that's gonna be fun. This right here is an Ender 3 build plate. It's 220 by 220 millimeters, I think. Well, here's the 2 of them next to each other. This is gonna be a monster printer. And such a monster build plate also needs a monster heating pad. This pad is 1,000 watts and plugs directly into 120 volt power. This is going to be plugged directly into the wall, and then everything else will have a separate plug. So I will need 2 plugs. And because this thing uses so much power to run, there's a good chance that I might need to isolate this on a different circuit to avoid tripping any breakers. Over here, we have the Orbiter 2.0. Filament will go in here, and the motor kind of pushes it out here, which will go into the hot end. It's the ultra high flow Fadus Rapido. And so it goes in here. There's some wires here that, with a heater and a temperature thermistor, that will heat up the hot end, heat up the nozzle, and the motor will push the filament through the heat sink into the nozzle, into the heater block, which gets really hot, and through the nozzle. And that's how the filament ends up on the build plate. All this stuff needs to be attached to the printer somehow. So that's what all this is. So these are all the parts for the hot end. So unlike the parts over here that I printed myself in ASA, I went to my local fab lab that I just became a member of at the local community college and had all these parts printed on the Fuse 1, which is like dream 3D printer. I could talk about how amazing the Fuse 1 is, but I was able to pay them to print all these parts for me, and they came out looking beautiful. You basically print everything in a giant block of nylon powder, which means nothing needs supports. You can just pack your volume full of parts, and if they fit, they print. Over here we have the electronics. This is the BTT, Big Tree Tech Octopus Pro board. For some reason, Big Tree Tech always sends a rubber duck with their stuff. You gonna squeak for me, little guy? There we go. This actually has room for 8 separate motors. If you saw over here, we have 5 motors for the X, Y, and Z1, Z2, Z3, and a 6th motor right here is the orbiter for extruding filament. So I actually need 6 of those 8 motor slots on this motherboard. And here's a wiring diagram for the motherboard, which I printed off. Here's the Raspberry Pi. Came with a Raspberry Pi, which is what's going to be driving the whole thing. And these are polycarbonate panels that I cut myself at that fab lab. I took a course at the fab lab on using a CNC router. I got a bunch of clearance polycarbonate panels from Piedmont Plastics in Elkridge, Maryland. And I spent 3 days, probably 10 hours total, in that lab. There's 15 different panels here, I think. And then over here, I just have an array of tools, which I'm sure won't be enough, but you know, I'll add to it as I need it. Obviously, I did quite a lot to get to this point. And now we're ready to start on the next phase of the adventure. I have no idea how long it's going to take, but the guys in the Discord said, don't count on doing it in a weekend. Ready, set, go.